these drugs are changing cardiometabolic health. And South Asians are not well represented in these studies.
And if we're left out of that, you and I might still have the same faith. We may still live the same lives we were destined. But the next generation, our kids and the future generation, they're going to be behind the curve relative to those represented groups.
1 hour shift in sleep dramatically increased the rate of traffic accidents for that shipping company.
How do I bridge the gap, right, between the ancient practices of my family and our culture versus what science says to do, what the data says?
Seema, welcome back. You've been quite the world traveler lately. You've been in London, Paris, and where else?
Killeen, Texas.
Killeen, Texas. What were you doing in Killeen, Texas?
We were volunteering, as every year we do. Manish and I are medics for Camp Bluebonnet, which is basically it's a camp that provides respite for parents of kids with type 1 diabetes. And it's obviously it's for the children as well, to help them feel normal and connect with other kids who are also experiencing life with type 1. So it's great. We were in London, and then we did Cambridge and went to Paris and did Versailles and went all around, and then landed back in the smack dab middle of Texas heat, which is like 1,000 degrees out here. But we're glad to be back.
I love it. I love it. I know your kids really enjoyed that from last year. Did they have fun this time?
Every year, such a great cause. And I think that they really walk away with a reminder of just how important our health is and how much we can take for granted when something goes awry, which is why I'm so excited about today's guest.
Yes, we have an amazing guest. And this guest actually bridges three things. It bridges diversity. We're going to talk about diversity, and not the type of diversity that you typically hear about, which is, diversity in corporate America or diversity in the boardroom. It also bridges health, right? You were just talking about type 1 diabetes. And believe it or not, there's a thread through London. So let me tell you about this guest. We have a physician. He's a cardiologist by training, right? And he is at Mass General, Harvard trained, was introduced to me by none other, our personal trainer, our friend Kunal of KMAC fame, right? That's the thread of London. And we have Dr. Romit Bhattacharya, and we're so excited to have him here because he's going to share some insight, some statistics on something that we all need to be aware of, because not only does it impact our lives, but it will impact the future. And he and his team are taking strides, just making huge leaps and bounds to change the face of healthcare for South Asians all over. Romit, welcome to the show. We're so excited to have you here. Give us a little bit more background, anything that I left out. Feel free to share.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here on the podcast. It really is an amazing opportunity, and thank you so much for all that you guys are doing about spreading, mental health awareness and stress awareness in the South Asian community. Thanks so much.
Oh, we're so thrilled to have you here. And I know, Seema, you've got a ton of questions, given that we've got two physicians and one lawyer. So before I turn it over to Seema, I will say it as quickly as I possibly can. One lawyer, two doctors. Nothing we say is legal or medical advice. Seema?
Agreed. Oh my gosh. Thanks for that. Disclaimer. So Romit, what I loved about what you do was there's actually a personal story, which I think is quite frankly why you're so good at what you do and why it's so impactful, is because there's a really deep why there. So can you share, I know you've been spending, listeners, I almost forgot to mention, what you focus on is bringing diversity into medical research. So can you share a little bit about where we are with that? Why, how well are we represented as South Asians, and why do you do what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for that question. I think the story begins a little bit with who I am and what I do. So I'm a Bengali American, Indian American, but my family's from West Bengal, India, and I grew up mostly in New York and then partially in Calcutta, India. So we moved back and forth a lot when I was a kid. And one of the things that I really take pride in, is that my family really put a big emphasis on education, like a lot of ours did. And it was a community in the U.S. that raised me, a Bengali American community here. And I take very little credit for waking up and one day becoming an Indian cardiologist, an Indian male cardiologist. It feels like in some ways a default path, but really it's the community that got me here. And today, what I do is I'm a general and preventive cardiologist at Harvard's Mass General Hospital, and I'm a genomics researcher at the Broad Institute of MIT and Harvard.
Mm.
And I wear those two hats. And on the clinical side, I see patients in the cardiac ICU, I see patients on the cardiology floors, but my main clinic is in prevention and cardiometabolic health, where I see patients who want to prevent the oncoming of disease, or if they've already had a disease event, they want to prevent the next event from happening. Um, and very often we get the why question. Well, why did this happen? Why did this happen? And sometimes we know the answers generally. Very often it's hard to say when a 35-year-old comes into your clinic and says, well, I've already had a heart attack, or I'm 32 and I have diabetes and I'm actually, not very overweight or anything. How did this happen? And that's where the research part comes in. And I'm part of a lab at the Broad that does specific work looking at the genetic and lifestyle underpinnings of cardiometabolic disease. How do these two things, the things that are in our control and not in our control, intersect to create disease? And this is in part because, if you look around in Bengal, you'll find a lot of sweet shops. You'll also see a lot of people who look like they go to a lot of sweet shops.
Right.
But what you won't see is, up until recently, things are changing. You won't see a lot of gyms or a lot of health food stores and this kind of stuff. Even though we kind of originated, not we, the Asian cultures originated sort of like not just farm to table, but like cave to table dining. It's like fresh food on every corner. And you can make these delicious subjis and delicious foods, but it kind of triggered my interest to think, well, how much of this is nature and nurture? And are there tools available to even suss some of this out? So I was already down this path thinking about this, sussing out the genetic and the lifestyle causes of cardiovascular disease and cardiometabolic disease, which include sort of diabetes, fatty liver disease, chronic kidney disease, and cardiovascular disease and stroke. When I was in medical training as a resident, and my father got sick at a very young age. He got leukemia, and it was a very dramatic course from diagnosis till death, under 4 months.
Wow.
And I'll just mention this part because I think it's important to sort of think about multiple perspectives. My mother said to me, "Hey, listen, I think this is because he was so stressed. He worked so hard to build a life for us here. He was an OBGYN and he was on call like all the time.
Yeah.
And there was one year where he was in solo practice. He was on call 24 hours a day for 365 days a year.
Ooh.
Wow.
Yeah.
And he slept very little, and he joyfully did it to take care of us. He was a very joyful man. But can you be stressed and joyful? Can you be sleep deprived and joyful? I think you can. And I kind of wrote off the suggestion that it was stress and sleep deprivation. I was like, that doesn't cause leukemia. Leukemia is random. And then we started doing more research into genetics and the blood cell niche in particular, and thinking about inflammation and the accrual of somatic variations, somatic mutations over the course of a lifespan. And we don't know for sure that stress and sleep deprivation can cause those things, but it's very biologically plausible. And I started wondering, what else is understudied in our group? What else do we colloquially know about risk in our families, in our genetics, and in the way we live our lifestyle, that these things may be interacting in a way that we can maybe prevent, but we don't know enough yet.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what has led me to the work looking at the South Asian community, lifestyle and genetics, and in particular, the OurHealth Study, which I know we'll talk more about.
Yeah. There's so much there that I can't wait to dive into. I remember, going through training myself, and no one really talked about that. And I think it's actually a major disservice. Of course, I haven't been back to school to know if things have changed, but the idea that stress and sleep. Those are such big, big, big things that I feel like every time I turn around now, I'm hearing about how important sleep is, how important building stress resilience is, because of the, immunocompromised outcomes that we can basically create for ourselves, as well as all the other things that happen. But generally speaking, I think it's fairly easy to just glide right through it and say, muscle up, buttercup, and then wonder, like, how did I get here?
I'll just share a small anecdote about the sleep thing, but I was talking to a patient at some undisclosed time in the past who worked for a shipping company that uses trucks, major shipping company that we all know. And they had said that they organized and they understood that there was an increased risk of traffic accidents on the day of spring forward.
Yes.
1 hour shift in sleep dramatically increased the rate of traffic accidents for that shipping company. And there's a corollary study in healthcare that shows that on spring forward compared to the days on either side of it, is associated with a measurable increase at the national level of heart attacks, fall backward a measurable decrease at the national level with the number of heart attacks. I'm not sure that data was disaggregated with how closely people lived according to like the time zone lines. But it still is a remarkably interesting study, associative, but not proof, but interesting.
Yeah, I mean, all that is interesting. And I recently heard, and I don't know if this is grounded in solid science, but it tends to make sense, right? Like it just speaks to something that instinctually you tend to believe, that if you are operating under stress, and stress is manageable, it's how we perceive what's stressful for one person is not stressful for another. But if you are operating under stress or sleep deprived or consistently exhausted, right? However that stress it manifests or is accumulated, whether physical, mental, or emotional, your body is in a more contracted state, more fight or flight. Pupils are dilated. Your muscles are ready for action. And the food we ingest and the oxygen and the water we take is diverted to creating the hormones for peak performance and running away from the saber-toothed tiger. And if we're under that phenomenon for an extended period of time, logic to me at least makes sense that the raw materials, food, water, oxygen, they're not diverted to the hormones and the portions of our body that are needed to rejuvenate and to recuperate or repair whatever damage or necessary bodily functions that need to be done, which is why we have to have this equal amount of time of rest versus high efficiency. They're two sides of the same coin, right?
Yeah, definitely sounds like a plausible explanation.
Yeah. So your work it goes a little bit deeper, though. Your work impacts sort of 4 or 5 steps before that, I should say. I knew it was a B word. I just couldn't figure out which one. I had to go through the dictionary in my head before that. Why don't you give us a little bit more specifically regarding South Asians? And, we make up 25% of the world's population, but your work has zeroed in on an area where we're underrepresented. Talk to us a little bit about that, a little bit more about why that's important.
Yeah, so they have up to 6 times the rate of diabetes compared to other races. One of the most important studies that looked at this was the InterHeart study. The InterHeart study is a study of over 30,000 individuals that was beautifully done across 52 different countries, looking at the traditional cardiovascular risk factors that lead to heart attack. And the question they sought to answer was, are these traditional cardiovascular risk factors of similar importance across the entire globe, right? And they found that, yeah, more or less, things like high cholesterol, high blood pressure, smoking, being overweight, having high psychosocial stress factors, and eating a diet low in fruits and vegetables, and not exercising. These are bad. There's bad things for everybody, and they appear to exert about similar hazard across all populations studied. Now, when they looked at South Asians, they found that South Asians had heart attacks nearly a decade earlier than other groups. And they delved in on that. And they found that South Asians had higher rates of diabetes, lower LDL cholesterol, which is the bad cholesterol that you typically think about, but higher ApoB to A1 ratio, which is a dyslipidemia metric that kind of shows that you have greater atherogenic, meaning sort of cholesterol plaque forming lipids in your blood, and lower protective lipids in your blood. And they had lower intake of fresh fruits and vegetables and much lower exercise rates. And so they said, oh, okay, we can explain this. We can explain this purely by traditional risk factors. There's nothing more to look at. But over time, data started accumulating from South Asia, certainly, but also Australia and Fiji and South Africa and the UK and Canada, where South Asian expats and even next generation South Asians who were being raised in different contexts, eating different food, exercising differently, had higher rates of cardiometabolic disease at younger ages and with fewer risk factors. And it started raising the question for people, is this only due to behavior and lifestyle, or is there a genetic component? The problem is that South Asians are not part of major academic studies in healthcare. They are, we think, less than 1% of clinical trial participants. We don't know that answer because South Asians are often lumped in as Asian other. So we don't know the difference between East Asians and South Asians. And we know that South Asians are around 1.3% of genetic study participants globally, despite being 25% of the planet. And this disparity has not improved over time. So if we wanted to explain how much of this risk is caused by genetics and how much is caused by lifestyle, currently the data sets don't exist to answer that question.
We're shooting in the dark.
Completely in the dark.
Yeah. That's frustrating, of course, for the patient. As you mentioned, before we hit record, there's a lot of times you find yourself talking to people and talking about their diagnoses and their treatment plans. And the question comes, why? How did this happen? So of course it's scary as a patient, but from the provider side too, it is really scary and frustrating to not only not have the answers, but not even have a place to look to go find the answers, which is why what you're doing is really just such a service to our community.
I really thank you. I think I'll take that opportunity to just tell you guys a little bit about the OurHealth Study and what we are planning to do.
Yeah, please.
So the OurHealth Study is a direct-to-participant study. So it's very different than other medical studies that we run where, someone comes to the clinic and says, hey, doc, I have this rare genetic condition. Can you help me? And we say, yeah, we have a study enrolling. Why don't you go on back and have our phlebotomist take your blood? It's a direct-to-participant study that's run entirely through the website, www.ourhealthstudy.org. You can go on the website. You can read about the stats about South Asian cardiometabolic disease and health and sort of the reasons why this cause is important. And then you can answer 4 screening questions. Are you over the age of 18? Do you have a mailing address in the United States? Can you read English and feel confident answering questions about your health in English? And do you self-identify as South Asian? And if those 4 screening questions you answer yes to, then you can fill out the consent online and you can enroll in the study by filling out surveys about your health and about your medical conditions, your medications you take, family history, that kind of stuff. And then we mail you a saliva collection sample kit from the Broad Institute in Cambridge. You deposit a saliva sample. It's kind of like taking a COVID test, except nothing goes up your nose. Put that back in the box, and you mail it back to us. And we're doing combination whole genome and whole exome sequencing on those samples in order to then create the first database that includes both lifestyle and genetic factors for cardiovascular disease and cardiometabolic disease. And we're going to contribute that data to large global consortia, anonymized. So no one's identifying information will be shared to large genetic consortia that allows them to compare the genetics of diasporic South Asians to genetics of other groups. down the line, I think hopefully by the end of this year, we'll also have a linkage to EHR agnostic, meaning that totally agnostic of the health system that you're part of, that you seek your care at. If you have one of those patient portals, like a MyChart or something that you log into, you can log into that through OurHealth, and we can also extract lab data, imaging data, ECG data, and if you opt for it, even wearable data, to be able to understand how people live their lives and to what extent, like one of the big problems that we have in health research and lifestyle is that we still collect data for lifestyle by saying, oh yeah, so do you think you eat well? And someone says, yeah, I eat pretty well. And then you say, oh, do you exercise sometimes? And they say, well, yeah, I exercise a couple times a week. And that's the level of data that we have, right? It's just self-report survey data. But with the advent of wearables and logging food, logging exercise, all this kind of stuff, we can get much more granular data there. And then when you combine that with genetic information, now you have good data combined with good data, which is a good output, as opposed to good data combined with bad data gives you a pretty terrible output. So overall, we're trying to create a one-stop shop that contains genetic data, survey data, family history, EHR data, and wearables, which will give us a very powerful discovery cohort to understand South Asian cardiometabolic risk.
That's so cool, because you're right. If you had asked me 20 years ago if I ate healthy, I would have said yes. And now I would still say yes, but what I consider healthy today versus what I considered healthy at, 20, 25, not the same thing, right? So
yeah. And what if we discover that there are specific genetic propensities, and we should talk about polygenic risk scoring a little bit down the line. But what if we discover that there are specific genetic propensities for somebody? Let's say you're at high genetic risk for diabetes, and some of the healthiest foods in the world are carbohydrates, right? Fruits, vegetables, cruciferous greens, whole grains. These are the healthiest beans. These are the healthiest foods in the world. But maybe if you have a high genetic risk for diabetes, maybe you do have to limit some of those carbohydrates a little bit more. Or perhaps there's a specific sensitivity to some other nutrient that we have yet to discover. And we discover that there's a pathway that creates some hazard for you by ingesting some nutrient in high volume. Then there may be very, very specific recommendations we could make if we're able to uncover those pathways through high fidelity data.
Yeah, no, I think what you're doing is fantastic, and I will become my OurHealth subscriber. I will sign up. But I want to go back. You said that South Asians were underrepresented, right? And I personally believe, throughout the span of humanity, there are technological advances that change the face of the planet, right? I'm old enough to remember AOL dial-up, and you can hear that sound of, and if you really take a step back then we were logging into America Online and we're getting our news and using AIM chat. But that is the same foundational technology that allows us to order an Uber, right? It's the internet, two computers connecting to one another. And with the advent of AI, I think our research ability, the advent of big computing and faster computers, it's going to speed up our ability to research and to run drug trials and molecular testing at a much faster rate. And the time from conception to market for a drug is going to compress over time. And just like with programming of AI, if it's programmed by a white heterosexual male, it's going to have certain biases. And I think what you're hoping to do, or what maybe you're not even hoping, but what the result of what you're trying to do is to be able to interject South Asian representation arguably at a crossroads where we are, where the research and the ability to provide recommendations or change lifestyle is going to hockey stick. We're going to be doing it. And if we're left out of that, you and I might still have the same faith. We may still live the same lives we were destined. But the next generation, our kids and the future generation, they're going to be behind the curve relative to those represented groups. So I promise there's a question there. I'll give you the question, but go ahead and answer. The question is, why have we been historically underrepresented?
Oh my goodness, Dinesh, This is one of my all-time favorite things to talk about, but also I just think it's such an insightful question. You know, biomedicine is at a huge inflection point. Whereas the first set of medications that humans discovered were plants, right? We would just chew down some plant and, there was something in it that we realized was good for us in some situation. Then we got to the phase of synthetic chemistry where we were able to isolate some of those compounds. And we were able to say, wow, okay, I've understood that it's this part of this plant or this molecule inside this plant. And then we were able to modify that molecule to make it stay longer in our system or not affect this other thing that it was going to have a side effect for. But those are all still pretty dirty pathways, right? They can those molecules can go lots of places. They can act in many ways, and maybe they're interrupting pathways at a point that if we had the choice to design it differently, we wouldn't have acted at that point. We would have acted either upstream or downstream from that particular moment. And then enter the age of immunological drugs, right? Your MABs, your SMABs, your all of these ABs, right? So the antibody mediated drugs, right? That modify the immune system. I personally have benefited from this. I was diagnosed with an autoimmune disease at age 16, and my life would have been completely changed if these drugs didn't exist. And it was part of what led me into the discovery phase of medicine. To modify the immune system meant that I can live a normal life. I can enjoy so much of like just activity and what life has to offer. And it changed my life. I saw when I went into medical training, I saw the development of the first immunotherapies for cancer that made people's tumors melt away. And things that we did not think were possible were possible. I'll say that if you guys get a chance to read Paul Kalanithe's book, When Breath Becomes Air, it's just one of the most beautiful pieces of writing that exists, in my opinion. And he was a young Desi man who developed lung cancer as a non-smoker, and survived for a while to have, in part due to these immunological drugs. Now we've taken another step forward, and this is becoming just incredible. We're talking about small interfering RNAs. We're talking about genetic therapies with CRISPR. We're treating sickle cell disease. There's folks out there who are working on CRISPRing the LDL receptor in the liver in order to essentially vaccinate you against coronary disease. These are just incredible times.
Yeah.
But each of these mutations that were discovered in order to target something was discovered through a unique family or a unique set of individuals who had a rare mutation. It allowed us to understand that this mutation was safe in humans, and to target it, we could block something and protect somebody against disease, right? South Asians South Asia is not a population. That's not a people. South Asia is composed of a number of small endogamous communities, people who have married within their community for, in some cases, thousands of years. That is obviously not good for us. We have high rates of genetic diseases. We have long tracts of what's called loss of heterozygosity or autozygosity, which means that there's large segments of our genome in these small communities that doesn't have variation. And it should. That's what protects us. Variation is what protects us. But what that means is that in those communities, you can detect rare variants that cause disease that have never been detected before. So South Asians are a uniquely powerful data set. We hold the key, potentially, in our own blood, or saliva in this case, to unlock the fact that our high rates of cardiometabolic disease, which is what the entire world is suffering from right now, right? The entire world is suffering from cardiometabolic disease, may unlock new therapies to help everybody, right? And Dinesh, I promise I'm getting to the answer to your question after a long-winded response.
No, I love it. All that is so needed. We need to hear that.
Yeah.
And why we don't contribute, I would phrase it maybe slightly more generously, because South Asians came to the United States, came to the UK, came to all these places wanting to build a life. And We joined whatever lab we could, took whatever job at whatever hospital we could to try and provide for your children. And the questions that were being answered were the ones that had already been established, right? The ones that your mentor wanted to answer, the ones that your boss wanted you to answer.
Mm-hmm.
And my sense is that there weren't as many people who felt that the South Asian story needed to be told or could be told, or that they could take a risk on telling that story. Now, as we're 2-3 generations into the diaspora, and I am just every bit as much American as I am Desi,
Mm-hmm.
I feel that I belong, and I feel that our story is worth investigating and being told. And my hope is that, whereas in years gone by, South Asians maybe even didn't consider themselves part of the milieu that people were interested in studying. Like, oh yeah, well, the diversity means something else in clinical trials. It doesn't mean me. They don't want. I don't know. Somebody should definitely increase diversity, but that doesn't mean South Asian.
Yeah.
That now I'm hoping that is changing, and that we're thinking that, wow, less than 1% in clinical trials, 1.3% in genetic studies. Now's the time. We have to get up off the couch. We have to get in the game, and we have to take care of ourselves and our future generations.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. And same with the MABs. I mean, I remember getting at one point 19 migraines a month, to the point where, when my son was younger, he would come into the bedroom and say, "Dad, do you have a migraine or do you have a headache?" And if I said yes, he would go away. And if I said no, then he would like, "Okay, let's play," or something. And Ajovy, which is freminizumab, right? Now I take that once a month, and they've just been decimated. So, and I always used to say, if there's one thing I could change about my life, it wasn't my looks. Pretty happy with that. My intelligence, my family. It was the fact that I got migraines. That was the one thing that was holding me back from living a full life. So I totally agree. But is there a stigma, or is there currently, or was there a stigma of, I don't know. I feel like there is, but I don't know if I'm articulating correctly, of maybe I don't want to be the guinea pig, or maybe on the other side, I don't want to find out. I don't want to give my saliva and my blood to just find out something that is going to be another thing I have to deal with. I would rather ostrich this.
Yeah. Dinesh, I'll put myself out there a little bit. I have theories on this.
Okay.
And I'd like to caveat these by saying they're theories, right? By no means do I think I know the way that everyone thinks or anything like that.
Sure.
But I do think that there's some hesitance. I do think that there's some worry about being a guinea pig, or about why does it have to be me that gives to this cause, or that volunteers my data? Can my data be used in a nefarious way? Might it hurt me in some way? I also think that there's a little bit of worry about discovery, about finding out if you're quote unquote fated to have something happen to you. I think that there's maybe a portion of our population that thinks in sort of deterministic ways, that, if it's my fate to have this disease, then I will.
Yeah, like it's written in the stars. The astrologer said that I would suffer from XYZ, and so therefore.
Yeah, there may be a portion of people who think that way. And I have lots of thoughts about this. I don't want to over answer the question that you're asking me, but I do think that what we're learning is that, especially as we gain more and more data, is that this life is a game of probabilities, and it's statistical. And when we have a high probability or a high chance of developing something in our life, that doesn't necessarily mean fate, but it might mean that we have to work harder to avoid that thing, right? Kind of like, if we live in an area that has really hot climate, right? Maybe we need to change our behavior a little bit and not go out in the hottest part of the day, and we have to take a nap, and we actually wake up earlier in the morning, and we stay up later at night, but we take a nap in the middle of the day. We just modified something because of the situation that we're in, right? And so I I hesitate to answer for everybody,
Mm-hmm.
but I do think that there is some stigma, there's some worry, and there's some fatalism. But I think there's a very real concern in today's environment around privacy as well.
Yeah. The other thing, I see this across the board, especially now as the elections start to come up and things, representation repeatedly comes up. In Texas, book bans, that's a big thing. And my question to you more is, actually not even a question, but can you share the story you talked about before we hit record about the clopidogrel? Because I thought it was so impactful, as to why does representation matter?
Oh my goodness. Yeah. So this is a bit of an embarrassing story for the healthcare field, not just me, but so beginning in the 1980s, so I'll say beginning in 1900 or so, the rate of cardiovascular mortality in the United States started climbing. And when you look at this graph, it's really just incredible. It is a sharp increase. And this was undeterred, unmitigated until really the 1980s. And we started seeing innovations in cardiovascular disease treatments. We started seeing the development of coronary interventions like stenting and PCI, and medications that treat heart failure and treat cholesterol and prevent your stents from closing down. One of the most important inventions there, or discoveries, was the discovery of antiplatelet medications that prevent your platelets from being quite so clotty. And that's because some of these medications, they prevent a blood clot from forming on a coronary stent after it's been put in to hold open your artery after you've had a heart attack. Your body sees that stent, sees the metal scaffold of that stent, and says, "Oh, that's foreign. I need to clot over that." And so the earliest antiplatelet that was being used was, of course, aspirin. But after aspirin, Plavix, or clopidogrel, is the most commonly prescribed antiplatelet on the planet to prevent people's stents from closing down or from clotting over. Now, the interesting thing about Plavix, or clopidogrel, is that clopidogrel is not an active drug once you take the pill. It's a prodrug. So that drug has to be absorbed into your system, has to go through the liver, first pass metabolism, and is modified by a enzyme in the liver. That enzyme has genetic variants. And if it harbors one or two of these variants, it can either dramatically slow the metabolism of Plavix, meaning that you get a much smaller dose than you think you're taking, or it can stop the metabolism of Plavix, meaning that you are not producing the active form of the drug, right? Now, this is important to know because if you've just had a heart attack and someone's put a stent in your coronary artery and you're prescribed aspirin and Plavix to protect that stent, if you don't take one of those medications, your risk of having a repeat heart attack jumps. Now, we've known this about Plavix for a long time, but in the populations studied, being a poor metabolizer of clopidogrel is quite rare, about 2% of the European population. And up until recently, we didn't really think that being an intermediate metabolizer of clopidogrel had too much of an effect, but now we see that it actually does increase your risk of having some heart attacks by a moderate percentage. South Asians have not had a large data set that could query these genetic mutations that cause poor or intermediate metabolism of Plavix until recently. The Genes and Health Study in the UK has about 50,000 genomes. Beautiful study, really great researchers, and they recruit out of East London, where there's a primarily Bangladeshi and Pakistani population there. This is a very simple pharmacogenomic study. They just said, compared to other cohorts, how many Bangladeshis and Pakistanis in this study have poor or intermediate metabolism of Plavix, or genetically predicted poor or intermediate metabolism of clopidogrel. And what they found was that about 6 times the number of Europeans, South Asians had 6-fold higher risk of having a poor metabolizer phenotype than Europeans, and about 3 to 4-fold increased risk of having a poor or intermediate metabolizer status than Europeans. And in fact, they took that one step further and they said, do these individuals go on to have more heart attacks? And it turns out they do.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Plavix was introduced to the world in the mid 1990s. It's been about 20 years that we've had, or almost 30 years that we've had Plavix with us. And we've known about the genetic variants in the liver that cause this metabolism issue for about 20 years. And we are now discovering in 2023, August 2023, that South Asians have 6 times the risk of having a poor being a poor metabolizer for this drug. So
Wow.
this is an important issue where if we're not represented in the genetic data and we're not represented in the clinical trials, we don't know how to treat ourselves.
Yeah. We're not getting the care that we need. And which is scary and frustrating when you go to the doctor and you say you've done, everything that the doctor has said to do. I'm taking my medication and I'm getting the sleep and I'm doing this. And why is it still happening? The idea that this drug that was prescribed to me isn't even able to work. That's not something that would pop up on my radar as a potential as a patient. And honestly, even as a doctor, I think you and I were chatting about this before too, where, when you see a patient and, very many of us can find ourselves in a position where we're busy. We're trying to make sure we see the next patient and the next patient and the next patient. We're skipping lunch. And you've got this patient that's like, well, that drug doesn't work for me. Or, they're reporting these quote unquote bogus symptoms that don't really fall in line with what we've been told about the drug or about the disease process. And we want to dismiss it. Right. And therefore we're not giving them the care they deserve, which is just very scary.
Yeah. And we're right now potentially in the middle of a renaissance in cardiometabolic drugs. We're talking about the SGLT2 inhibitors, GLP-1 receptor agonists, right? Like these drugs are changing cardiometabolic health. And South Asians are not well represented in these studies. So when we're talking about one-off side effects or, oh, I don't tolerate this dose of this medication, insurance companies will pull you off of the drug if you're not on the trial dose of the medication, right? So they can cancel your qualification for certain drugs, for certain GLPs if you're don't reach the target dose. But what if that dose is too much for certain people, right? We need to know these answers. And I'm not saying that all of it is about genetics, right? Some of it is certainly lifestyle, right? Like you don't only inherit your genes from your parents, you also inherit your practices, your habits. And so, yes, we need to be exercising more. We need to be taking care of our physical health. We need to be nourishing our bodies differently. We need to be sleeping better. We need to be reducing our stress, not smoking. All of these things are super, super, super important. And there are trials to demonstrate as such. Our group, Amit Kara, led a paper in the New England Journal in 2016 showing that even if you're at high genetic risk for cardiovascular disease, if you live a favorable lifestyle on just like 4 metrics that they queried for that, it was a very simple test. They said if you live a favorable lifestyle, then you can drop your risk from being extraordinarily high to the same level as that of somebody at low genetic risk. So your genes are not your fate. Even if you inherit high genetic risk, you can take care of yourself in order to prevent these outcomes from happening. But once you've developed a disease and you need medications to work for you, then we need to know that those are the right medications, that they will work.
So powerfully said.
Yeah. That all that is really highlights or underscores the importance of the work you're doing. And the stat about the Plavix, right? 6-fold. When earlier in the show, we talked about South Asians being at a higher propensity for cardiometabolic diseases. Now we're having compounding types of statistics against us. So I know, Seema, you have one more question you'd like to ask, but really quickly, at this show, we want to help South Asians think better, do better, and live better. And a lot of that, comes down to mindset, think better. And we also want to bring on people that are doing amazing things to serve as an inspiration for both Seema and I, as well as people that are listening. And I'd like to ask the question of you, right, Romit, directly, and I want your answer. In that, what you're deciding or what you've chosen to do is to do something that's the first time ever done in the world, right? Those are big words. And what drives you? What wakes you up every day? Because your passion is very tangible. It's coming through. Anyone that's listening to this, their ear is going to be passionate, right?
Yeah.
Their entire day is going to be filled with passion. Where is the thought, and what have you done with it? Because you've thrown it away, obviously. Where is the thought that, you know what? I'm just Romit. I just got to make a salary, live a good life. There's so much to do on Netflix. There's so many beers to drink, and there's so many places to explore. Somebody else could do that hard work. Like, it's not for me. Somebody else. Where is this bigness coming from? And I do believe you'll change the world. I do believe you'll be an inspiration to a lot of people.
Already changing the world.
Absolutely. Where is that coming from? What have you done to that crazy voice that's trying to talk you out of it? And what can you share with other people so they can maybe do something of similar impact one day?
Dinesh, thank you so much. Those are extraordinarily kind words. I'm not sure I deserve. But I think that for me, the bigness comes from my own smallness, I would say. I'm a very small part of a very big journey. And, I'm absolutely aware that my travels from, growing up in New York to coming up to Boston to do research is a much smaller distance than my parents bridged coming from India to the US, and a much smaller distance than my grandparents bridged, starting with nothing post partition, having everything destroyed, and starting up anew with only a belief in themselves and a hope for future generations. I feel like I am at this very tip top of this pyramid, and I owe it to so many people behind me and so many people who have raised me up to give back. And that's the point of the OurHealth Study. That's why it's named as such. There was another acronym we had. It was going to be called SAMOSA initially, which I really loved as well. But we felt it was almost too cutesy to convey what this is supposed to be.
Yeah.
It's about us. This project will only go as far as we want it to go. And for me, like as you said, all those other things, joy, like squeezing the juice out of life, that is this. That's marrying your work and your life and your passion. And I will say that a big part of my passion is physical activity and exercise, and becoming a preventive cardiologist has been so sort of enhancing of that passion, that I get to talk to other people about it. I get to spread that joy, and I get to tell people, hey, listen, getting healthier is not about restricting your life. It's about creating this expansive, beautiful life. And so I'd say all of those things, but most notably, like a real sense of indebtedness and gratitude.
Such wise words. And I think you could each of those could be like a bumper sticker or something.
Yeah.
Oh, so well said. And, so I'm not sure if this question even really fits given your answer, but I'm going to ask it anyway, because I think you mentioned, your grandparents and kind of where we all come from. And you doing what you do now is the cutting edge of technology, right? And where I think we as South Asians, particularly South Asian Americans, where we find ourselves is, how do I bridge the gap, right, between the ancient practices of my family and our culture versus what science says to do and what the data says. And, I can't imagine, I can't tell you how many times my own grandmother would say things like, oh, if you're coughing, drink some turmeric milk and, put some honey in it or whatever, right? And you would ask, like, why? And there was never really an answer. So we find ourselves sort of dismissing all of that ancient wisdom that has served us up until this point. But talk more about that. Talk about really the importance of expanding into both, as you just said.
Oh, 100%. I love this topic so much. the first thing that I'll say is that, the absence of evidence does not disprove something,
Mm.
but the presence of evidence can disprove something. So there are certain things that I think probably help and aren't going to hurt, and I think that we should honor those, and I think we should take that evidence for what it is from thousands of years of observation. And I love those things. And for instance, I had a bad cough last fall, and really the only thing that I could do was I had cloves in my mouth all the time, and it was amazing. I was like, wow, this is like really incredible. I knew it was a post-viral cough. I knew it wasn't going to go away for weeks, and I didn't want to keep hammering cough suppressant. Cloves. It was amazing. But there are certain things that I think we can also recognize. The example I like to give is a corollary in Western medicine. It's that Laennec, who invented the stethoscope, he did all types of crazy device manipulations before he developed the stethoscope. And if he was alive today, I wonder if he would even use the stethoscope, right? Maybe he'd be thinking about ultrasound or CT, or maybe he'd be an imager, right? And it's incumbent upon us to use the technologies of the day to expand and use the inspiration from our ancestors to be able to say, yeah, this is the new thing, right? They were inventors. They were discoverers. They were on the cutting edge. They did everything they could to use all of the information at their disposal to make the next recommendation. And they wrote tomes about it, how to live a good life, right? And I would say that, depending upon what piece of advice we're talking about, but I'd say like thousands of years ago, and actually not that long ago, I would say like less than 100 years ago, we were dying largely of malnutrition, of undernutrition, of diarrheal disease, of issues of hygiene. And it was very important to follow specific rules that, yes, were made religious in certain circumstances, but they were to try and help us avoid the major killers of the day.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time, undernutrition was a big problem. In today's world, everybody is increasingly, not everybody across the world uniformly right now, but most countries and most people are increasingly suffering from overnutrition and over caloric but under nutrient dense food ingestion. And so, not too long ago, even a generation or two ago, a laddu for a child was truly a blessing, right? You're giving them fat and calories and sugar, and they're going to use those calories because they're undernourished to develop their brain and their muscles and their body, and they're taking care of themselves. And I think today we have to look at the environment we're in, and we have to make decisions just like our ancestors would have to say, what is the most helpful way that I can nourish my body? And so I think a lot of this stuff is actually in line with one another. Yeah. And when we look at, I look at my grandfather, for instance, he had a very regimented life. He would eat a certain amount of certain things. He would go for a walk every morning. He would walk to work, walk back. There were just like very specific things he did every day. And I even saw that like later in life, when he came to the US and he had joined us, he was very bothered by the fact that he couldn't take part in those things. So I actually think that our ancestors would very much be in line with the idea that we need to change things a little bit given the scenario that we're in. And I don't think a lot of this is as much at odds with one another. It's nostalgia, I think. We have nostalgia for these traditions. And that's why I love the idea of modifying them as well and making them our own and being able to continue them in healthful ways.
So good. I love that you talked about things not being at odds so much as just existing in harmony, coexisting, if you will. So you've taught us so much. I could probably go on and on and on, but I'm curious, is there maybe like a fun fact or something else that you could teach us in like a quick 30 seconds to just say, hey, this made my life better?
Yeah. I would say in terms of something that made my life better, it's a total non sequitur. But I really enjoy it. It's a book called Moonwalking with Einstein. It was published a while ago, actually. I don't know if it's flying off the shelves these days, but it's a book about a young journalist who goes to cover the World Memory Championships, and the idea that these people who compete as like with super memories or whatever, they they vehemently deny that there's any such thing as a photographic memory or a super memory. It's a task that can be trained, and it's actually leveraging a different memory system that we have in our brains already to create really amazing memories. And it gives the example of sort of Greek education systems where rote memorization was super important. And in today's day and age, memorization is not in vogue. We can look everything up. There's ChatGPT. There's all these different things. But I was raised sort of memorizing poetry, and my mom would always make sure that we recited the same poem every night, and then we'd always share all these other poems with us. And on a beautiful sunny day like today, very few of us like Google like what's a nice poem about a sunny day. But like when you see the leaves blowing in a certain way and a line of poetry comes to your mind, I think about the value of still maintaining some memorization, some committing things to memory. And Moonwalking with Einstein, that book really changed the way I think about my brain. So that was a totally crazy non sequitur, but I really enjoyed that book, and maybe your listeners will too.
That's so great. I put it on my list. I'm looking forward to reading it. Books like those and your story to go with it, I feel it's going to be etched in my memory for forever because it came with such good high praise. That's a good one. Thank you. As we go through our wrap up, we have a little bit of a tradition here where we call it Ask It Forward. And the guest who was on the show previously left you a question without knowing who you were. So it's completely shooting in the dark. And after I ask that question and you answer it, you'll get a chance to leave one for the next guest. And you can have as much fun as you want, or you can be pretty aggressive and challenge them. We've had all of it. And ironically, our previous guest was Tejal Patel, none other the Tejal Patel, who is also a K-Macker. She wrote Meditation for Kids.
Which is medication.
Yeah, which is actually pretty funny. I just saw a TikTok where someone was saying that she needs a cation, whether it's a vacation, a staycation, or medication. She needs a cation from life. So yeah, Meditation for Kids, and you guys will actually meet in New Jersey. She's going to be at the event, and so anyways, to Tejal's question, without further ado, what is one tender childhood moment that left you feeling embarrassed that still haunts you today? Tejal, then play around.
Oh wow! A tender childhood moment that left me feeling embarrassed that still haunts me today. Wow, this is a really deep cut, I guess.
Take a moment, think about it, and I'll let the listeners know in the meantime that we share an outline with our guest, but we leave this question off so you get the full raw response, so we can have a little fun here.
All right, I got it.
Okay.
Let's do it.
So I got mad at my parents when I was about 9 or so. And at this point, we were living in Calcutta, India, and we had just moved there. And I was fairly American, and I'd gotten mad at my father, and I had told him, you know what, like I'm not going to talk to you. And so I went into my room. I thought, how can I up the ante a little bit? And I was like, I know, I'm going to run away. So I pack a backpack, and in it, I think I put like my Power Ranger. I think I put some cookies. I think maybe I put like a tape recorder or something, and then I zip up my back, maybe a dinosaur. I zip
all
up
the
my
essentials.
all the essentials, right? And I zip up my backpack and I march outside and I tell my dad, I'm running away. And he's like, great, but when you walk out that door, those are awfully nice shoes you're wearing. Someone's going to look at those shoes and they're going to want those shoes. They're going to take them from you. And then there's some dogs on the corner over there. And guess what? They look pretty hungry. So I don't know what's going to happen. So you should go. You're your own person. You should go. But it might be a little dangerous outside. And so I huff off downstairs and I open the front door. And I take like 2 steps out. And I look around, and all of a sudden, our like charming little neighborhood with like the panvala and the dude guy and the mistri who's like doing the ironing, all of a sudden it takes on this nefarious appearance, and I get terrified, and I run back inside, and I just go back to my room, lock my door, be even more upset with my father. But that was the 30 seconds or so that I ran away from home. My dad did not stop me.
I love it.
Did he hear? Did you have to hear about it later, or was he just?
No,
Yeah.
it was. They were. I'm sure they had a great laugh about it, but they were pretty kind about it.
Oh. Breaking generational trauma. That's all. That was the whole episode with Thejal, and so I love that you you shared that, and with honestly such joy. It was really fun.
Yeah, good parenting lesson. All right, your turn, buddy. What question would you like to torment our next guest with?
I think that drawing on a little story that we just shared a little bit ago about the poetry at bedtime, I think I'd like to ask, what piece of art, be it poetry, novel, visual, auditory art, would you most like to share, where you think that everybody in the world should listen to it or should take part in it?
That's a great question.
That is really good. And listeners, we've shared this with you before. These questions that we ask under the guise of asking one guest or another are actually questions that we take the time to try to answer. I'm actually reflecting on what is the one thing I would share. So we'd encourage you to do that as well. And with art, I think you can make someone's day better. So we encourage you to answer it and share as well. That's a great question.
Absolutely. And I love that this is bringing to mind the podcast episode we did with Malti, because she's an Austin-based, she's actually very worldly, but she currently lives in Austin as an artist. And one of the things she touched on was the importance of art and creativity in life and the richness that it can provide. And that was kind of her passion and mission. So if you haven't had a chance to listen to that episode, highly recommend it.
Awesome. Well, too.
Yeah. As our listeners know, we are deeply grateful for the guests that we get to have on the show. You are what makes it so special and fantastic. And so, Romit, we'd like to thank you by sort of continuing to spread impact. And the way we do that is to make a small contribution to a nonprofit or a charity that you support, because we want to hear what causes are important to you. And we like to share with our listeners so that those causes actually get a little bit of time in the spotlight as well. So what is something that's important to you that we can contribute to?
Absolutely. Well, I'll say that I would be remiss if I didn't say that the OurHealth Study is currently still philanthropically funded fully. So it's funded through small donors and large donors. And in order to get to our goals, we still have a significant amount of fundraising that we would need to get through. So that is nonprofit through Mass General, and I can share the link with you guys later.
That would be great.
But outside of the health space, a nonprofit that has really, really resonated with me personally is the Equal Justice Initiative that Brian Stevenson started, which is a legal organization to clear people's names who have been wrongfully accused or who are on death row, and even just the impact that becoming part of the carceral system in this country has on people when they've even committed minor crimes. So the Equal Justice Initiative is a really, really incredible nonprofit that I would also encourage everyone to look at.
Yeah, and I would encourage the listeners to take a look at the OurHealth Study, and if you feel so called, make a contribution or participate. But Romit, before we sign off, tell us where people can find you, if they can connect with you, and certainly share the OurHealth link again. And tell us what you're excited about.
Yeah, absolutely. So you can find me at www.ourhealthstudy.org. We have an email at MGB that is available on the website as well. And you can find me on Twitter at RomitB_MD. So those are kind of my websites and socials.
And if you're a K-Macker, you can find him
Exactly. Yeah, you can also
Find
find
him
me
there.
giving a talk at the the KMAC convention in New Jersey, July 27th. And so I'll be there giving a talk on cardiovascular disease and cardiometabolic disease in South Asians.